Now here we'll discuss not just water balance, we're actually going to also include electrolyte balance. And the concept of balance means that you want the amount of intake to be equal to the amount of loss. So water balance exists when the amount of water that we take in is equal to the amount of water that leaves the body. So water intake is equal to water output. So what are the different resources or different sources of water intake? Obviously, the majority of water, we intake that through drinking different beverages. Our moist food, not hard food, but moist food does have water in it as well. And then our own cells also make water as a product of the different metabolic reactions that are occurring in the cell. So on average, the daily intake of water is about 2,500 milliliters, which is 2.5 liters. When you compare that to the average daily output of water, we obviously lose most of the water through urine. We also lose some water through the skin and lungs. And we lose some water in feces and a little bit in sweat. So there is a little bit of a difference between the sweat here and the water loss through skin here. The water loss in skin here is through perspiration, which we are going to be losing some water through the skin pores, whether we're exercising or we're hot or not. Okay, so that happens regardless. The water lost in sweat would be the part of maintaining body temperature homeostasis. So when we're exercising or if we are in a hot climate, we're going to increase water loss through sweat. But again, the water loss through skin that is under here, skin and lungs, through the lungs through exhalation and the skin through perspiration, that represents about 28% of water loss every single day. On average, again, the total output is about 2,500 milliliters or 2.5 liters, and you see how they are supposed to be equal. But obviously, this is not really, this is like in perfect conditions, but things change. We might drink more water on days than others. We might actually sweat more on certain days than others. So there has to be that balance on making sure that they are equal in order to maintain water homeostasis. And water homeostasis is actually controlled by the hypothalamus. There is a thirst center in the hypothalamus, and that thirst center has what are known as Osmo receptors. So these are receptors that detect changes in the osmolality of blood, which means in plain English, it detects if the blood is too concentrated with salt or if has it been diluted from salt. Okay, so again, the Osmo receptors detects changes of osmolality of blood. And remember when we were talking about in chapter 20, when we mentioned that the distal tubules and the collecting ducts, that are parts of the nephron, were not permeable to water except in the presence of ADH. So let's take the whole scenario now that we could, take a look at the bigger picture. So these osmoreceptors that are found in the hypothalamus, if they do detect increase in osmolality of blood, that means that this person is dehydrated. That is going to stimulate the secretion of ADH. Okay, remember it's made in the hypothalamus, released from the posterior pituitary. So now ADH will be released from the posterior pituitary. It is going to open up the aquapores, which are found in the distal tubules and the collecting ducts. That is going to make sure that water is reabsorbed back into the body and is not lost in urine. Okay, and again, I would definitely recommend, if you do not remember this part of ADH, that you go back and review that in chapter 20. Now for the process of electrolyte balance. So how do we intake electrolytes and how do we get rid of electrolytes? So you found that electrolytes intake are basically almost the same as water. So we get in electrolytes with fluid, foods, and metabolic reactions. Remember that electrolytes is very closely associated with water. So when we intake water through fluids and foods, you'll definitely find electrolytes in there with them. And then our metabolic reactions also produce some electrolytes. Now, in order to get rid of these electrolytes, we get rid of them through urinating them, or through elimination of electrolytes in feces, or through perspiration and sweat as well. A couple of hormones that we've learned about when we talked about the endocrine system, and again, you want to go back and review those portions, would be how parathyroid hormone levels regulates the plasma levels of calcium ions. And calcitonin also plays a role in there, but PTH definitely has the upper hand on that. And then the plasma levels of potassium and sodium ions are also regulated by the changes in aldosterone hormone levels. So remember when we talked again in chapter 20 and in the endocrine system, we mentioned that aldosterone increases potassium tubular secretion and increases the tubular reabsorption of sodium ions. And this ends this portion. In the next one, we will be talking specifically about the balance of the pH scale.